Good evening, this is Micah Hart from the class CSA 174 presenting my project to you called Water Utility Company. So, the function of this program is that it will compute and display information for a utility company which supplies water to its customers. And for a specified customer, the program will compute and display the amount of money which the customer will be billed for water usage during the current billing period. And the conditions that must be met for the program to function as intended is that the input values that the customer has placed has to be in the range of 0 to any value that has 9 place values. It cannot go over 9 place values or a value that is less than 0 or any negative number. And the second condition for the program to operate as intended is that the customer code inputted by the customer has to be the characters R, C, or I, or their capital equivalency, such as capital R, capital C, capital I. R for residential, C for commercial, and I for industrial. And the flags that will be assigned to a value of false is the first one is the variable flag 1. This flag is assigned to false when the ending meter reading or initial meter reading is not in the range 0 through any value that has 9 place values. And flag 2 is assigned to false is when flag 1 is assigned to false or the customer code was not valid. So an example of this is when the customer code is T, X, Y, or integer values such as 10, 11, 69, and 420. And to get on with the program on the right of my screen, as we'll dissect this to fully understand it. So, this first block right here is just simply the prompt. And the first calculations of the user input is based on the meter readings. It does not involve the customer code yet. So, in this parentheses right here, this is essentially the parameters of the user inputs that is required for the program to execute as intended. So, for this first statement right here, is that 0 is less than or equal to initial meter reading, and it has to be less than 1 billion. It's essentially stating that the initial meter reading value has to be in between 0 and 1 billion, or meaning a value that is less than 10 place values. And the second statement right here, where both conditions has to be met, where each value has to be in the same parameters or range, where ending meter reading also has to be greater than or equal to 0 or less than 1 billion. Any value that is less than 10 place values. And if those conditions were never met at all, meaning the user input has placed a value that is less than 0 or a value that has 10 place values, it will assign the flag 1 to false, meaning that the program will output a invalid statement error and it will not execute any calculations. And if those user inputs met the range that is in between 0 and a value that is less than 10 place values, it will be passing this first if statement where the ending meter reading is greater than initial meter reading, where it will calculate the customer's water gallon use by finding the difference between the ending meter reading and initial meter reading. That will be then divided by 10, and it will assign the flag 1 to a value of true. And for this else statement right here, meaning if the ending meter reading is less than or equal to the initial meter reading, it will be then passing this else statement, where gallons used will be 1 billion minus initial meter reading, 1 billion because that's the max value that the parameter that the range has to be met, plus the ending meter reading, which resets to 0 and continues on afterwards. And this next section of code right up to here will be based on the customer code and the gallons of water used, assuming that the flag 1 is true. If the flag 1 is false, it would be directly placed on this else statement where flag 2 will be assigned to a value of false. Assuming that the flag 1 is true, it'll be placed in the first if statement where the customer code is a R, meaning the customer is a residential, where the calculations will be based on the amount bill will be assigned to 5 plus gallons used times this value right here, and it will assign to a flag true. And it goes on for each customer code, where each has a different calculations based on the project. And if either flag was false, it will be placed where the program will execute this if block where amount bill will be 0 and the gallons used will be 0. And this is the program outputs. And this error output will only execute if flag 1 was false or flag 2 was false, where it will print out the invalid entry. And the additional prompts are here. So to test out the test cases, we are given a sheet right here where the correct values are outputted. So for the first test case, we want to see when the condition when the ending meter reading is greater than initial meter reading. So we'll be testing out test case 4 from the bottom sheet. So customer code is C, initial is 125, and the ending meter reading is 40,125. That's test case 4. This is the one right here. Test case 4, where the gallons used is that value, and the amount billed is 1,000. And the next test case, which the first case was correct, is when the ending meter reading is less than the initial meter reading, which is when the customer code is I, the initial meter reading is, all of them are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7, 9 digits of the first place 9 for the first 8 place values, and a initial meter reading of 5. And that's the test case 6 from the bottom sheet, where it has a gallons of water use is 0.8 and amount bill is 1,000. And the next test case that we want to test out is a condition that I actually made up the since when ending meter reading is equal to initial meter reading was never given an example here. So when the customer code is R and the initial meter reading is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 500, where the difference between the max value, which is 1 billion, minus the the initial meter reading is just 500, and your ending meter reading is simply 500, where the ending meter reading is equal to beginning meter reading, it will be simply be 1000 divided by 10 to calculate the gallons used, and the amount bill, which is seen in the customer code R as residential right here, where it will equal to $5.05. Now, to test out the error conditions, we'll first test out the first case, test case 2, which is when customer customer code is T, which is not included in the conditions, where it will execute the calculations, and it doesn't really matter what these values will be because it will not do any of the calculations. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but we will still do it regardless. 5, where it will output a invalid entry, and all of the values are 0. And we want to test out the test case 11, where it's R when the initial meter reading is more than 10 place values, and the ending reading is just say 100. It's also an invalid entry. And the last test case value that we want to test out is when the ending meter reading is more than 10 place values. So customer code is I, initial meter reading is 100, and the ending meter reading is a value that's more than 10 place values, or say it's more than 9 place values. It would simply, okay, I don't know why I did that. Where the ending reading error condition has a customer code of I, initial meter reading is 100, and the ending meter reading is a value that has more than 9 place values, it would simply print out a invalid error. It won't do any of the calculations. And I've tested out most of the conditions that are met, and thank you for viewing this project.